I've been covering Overwatch since its release way back in 2016, and through that time, it's been a roller coaster of a relationship. We followed the highs and the lows, and the reason I'm still here willing to put in a serious amount of my life into making content for this game is because through it all, even 7 years later, I am still deeply in love with this game. In today's video, I wanted to elaborate on all the things that touch my heart the most about Overwatch, and to make sure you get the most out of your Overwatch experience, you're going to want to check out today's video sponsor. Today's video sponsor is NVIDIA, and as all PC gamers should know, NVIDIA makes the best graphics cards out there, but they've also got crucial settings that are going to improve your in-game performance. All Overwatch players have to put on NVIDIA Reflex. And why is that? Well, NVIDIA Reflex is going to cut down on your system latency. Gamers were always trying to improve our response time, but what is system latency? System latency is the natural delay between your gaming inputs and your machine registering them into the game. Overwatch is a fast-paced game. You want your mouse to register as fast as possible. Turning on NVIDIA Reflex in Overwatch can cut down your system latency by half. Yeah, you want to turn it on. NVIDIA Reflex works on NVIDIA's older cards as well, but if you want to maximize your performance, which of course you do, you can pick up the 40 series of cards. The 4090 is getting Overwatch to run at 360 frames. Oh my goodness. Frames do win games. It's the difference between you landing that headshot or hitting that ability or responding in time. Don't let your system lag you down anymore. Upgrading your system can make you feel like a superhero in game. It's a huge competitive advantage. You got to turn on NVIDIA Reflex in Overwatch, but to learn more about NVIDIA's industry-leading performance, check the link in the description to read about that and their software settings. And if you really want to dominate, pick up a new graphics card while you're at it. Check out more from NVIDIA by clicking the link in the description. The first easy answer that we have to get out of the way before I get to some of the more surprising parts of the video is Overwatch's gameplay is simply second to none. Blizzard strives for a special fluidity to every Overwatch character that stands out in the industry to make Overwatch the best-in-class hero shooter. The abilities are unique and roll into one another, so they're somewhat easy to learn in isolation, but when sequenced together, create a masterful gameplay loop that you can leverage against your opponents. Baked into the game are soft and hard counter interactions between the cast, but mastery can overcome these in surprising ways, leading to some pretty heroic moments on your favorite characters. An example of this is Junkrat, who's a personal favorite of mine and has hilarious potential at all levels of play. While in theory, he should struggle to shoot up at flying heroes because he lobs slow projectiles, which are hard to hit on airborne targets, but because he has an insane amount of burst damage and mobility potential, with enough skill, he can execute his gameplay loop to perfection to overcome a matchup that should be a disadvantage on paper. While meta theorists and tryhards will always want their teammates on the most optimal pick, Overwatch has some principles similar to fighting games, where execution on an unfavored pick can beat a counter at least some of the time. Don't get too optimistic for that playstyle as a tank and we're all good. It's this kind of heroic expression that really leads to some peak moments that don't exist in other games that have more simple baseline mechanics where it's just gun-on-gun action and you're all kind of doing the same thing. Overwatch instead has texture, advantage, and disadvantage states that you can overcome to make the big plays feel bigger. Overwatch heroes have unique playstyles with a sense of synchronicity with what they do and who they are as a character. The plays represent their personality and values as much as any backstory would. The gameplay expresses it in itself. Junkerqueen is savage, brutal, aggressive. Reaper is sneaky, shifty, lurks and pounces. Kiriko is witty, cunning, swift, and you can do this for every character in the game. Their identity and skill set matches up nicely, and I believe the more heroes you learn, the more you can fall in love with the entire cast or deeply with just one or several. Hero identity in Overwatch is something other games don't even come close to. When I try to play other games, it feels like those characters have abilities that are tossed onto the character as opposed to defining and enforcing who they are. This is the hero fantasy Blizzard likes to talk about. They nail it with Overwatch, and we might have expected them to, seeing as much of the original team were veterans from the early days of World of Warcraft. It's this masterful design we can expect from some of the best RPG game builders of all time. And they took the Blizzard formula to all aspects of the shooter game. Blizzard traditionally is known for taking a game genre, smoothing some of the sharp edges that alienate new players, making it approachable for a wider audience. And Overwatch is no different. While some game mechanics are distinctly designed to pay homage to every top shooter game in history, Blizzard has remixed those elements surrounding a character identity to make it feel entirely new in their universe. We can clearly see the influence differences. Cassidy's Magnum reminds of the kick and impact from the one from Half-Life 2. Pharah's rockets look and feel nearly identical to the classic Quake rocket launcher, which both send slow projectiles of death to their opposition, and Batiste's 3-round burst feels very close to COD 4's staple M16 or the BR from Halo, both allowing for satisfying accuracy. The game is riddled with influences, and I haven't even mentioned Team Fortress 2 yet, but for many of them, I'm sure a younger audience of players may not even recognize, but for an old codger gamer like me, it feels like being wrapped in a warm FPS nostalgia blanket. Other things to love are the responsiveness of the controls, the satisfying combos, the impact that so many abilities have, some high skill, some just tactical. Hurling a Diva Bomb in the air might not take as much mechanical skill as a Widowmaker headshot, but they both net in an insta-kill because Overwatch is a hero shooter, not a tac shooter. The abilities have equal strength in this game, so you better learn how to track ults and use cover if you intend to dodge the blast radius of the next big ultimate your opponent has coming online. But that's part of the fun, really. Other games may just be about hitting shots. Overwatch is a clash of heroic gameplay. It's like the mixed martial arts of shooter games and MOBA games all rolled into one. And it's that gameplay that makes hero matchup knowledge perhaps just as and maybe even more important than pure execution, which leads to endless gameplay possibilities and an infinite skill ceiling. As you not only have to master your favorite hero's kits, there is a constantly changing battlefield to predict and outplay as players fall and ultimates come online. Still on gameplay, I want to talk about a short improvement they made from the transition from Overwatch 1 to 2, switching from 6v6 to 5v5. I loved the change at launch and still do to this day. While I think the tank counter picks are a bit brutal nowadays, other than that, for the most part, the game has maintained relatively good balance for the majority of its launch year thanks to the format. While the one tank may feel they need to swap due to overwhelming counters, the rest of the team has a lot of flexibility in how they approach the match. In 6v6, multiple tank picks too easily would gum up the action and make it easy to defend against damage threats because both tanks could use their defensive abilities in a cycle and essentially silence the enemy threats indefinitely. 5v5 maintains as the superior format for its asymmetrical nature, because even though it still feels bad to be losing, there's always a firing lane for you to actually hit shots and make small impacts so it can at least feel like you can impact the enemy, as opposed to just shooting at a shield while your team regroups. Even if it does require the hot hand of a lifetime to actually swing a fight back in your favor, the potential is still there, or at least for me, because I play broken heroes like Kiriko. Next, I want to talk about the distinct feel of Overwatch characters. It's baked into the base movement that's hard to find in games nowadays. All Overwatch heroes have the strafe speed maxed out, without an acceleration ramp so that you can immediately zip around the battlefield, but it does make characters harder to hit. The mid-air control movement allows for a forgiving amount of adjustments, and these two together means the base movement of the game is very powerful, even before we talk about the insane mobility abilities in the game. Just moving through the world itself as any character is lightning fast and immediately responsive, making a turn to other games that purposely slow you down to make hitboxes easier to hit feel worse to play, at least for me. This was a genius move by the developers because it gave the movement freedom of previous arena shooters without the crushing winner-takes-all skill ceiling problem. In those older games, because the powers were through the map, you had to go pick them up, the best players could easily steamroll everyone. But Overwatch, the heroes' kits have a certain power budget, and typically, high skill ceiling output heroes have limited power in their cooldowns in order to compensate for their contribution, and vice versa. This allows for ability-based heroes like Mercy to compete with the value of a big playmaker like Ana, which simply would never be the case in an older school, more top-down weighted fragathon type shooter. This is a huge benefit to Overwatch because you can access the game on your own terms at your own pace. You can choose which skill sets that interest you and even play at multiple skill ranges as you learn more roles and heroes. It's a beautiful thing, really, and is entirely unique to Overwatch. As other games, typically you have a base skill set you must master to excel. Overwatch is truly diverse in its gameplay. Next, the visuals, especially maxed out on next-gen graphics. Overwatch 2's engine is stunning. The art design is second to none, and I feel gets slept on somehow now that the game has been out for so many years. The silhouettes and distinct, recognizable shapes of the characters is something that I went to praise earlier with the hero identities. That helps you visualize the game when playing. The presentation overall is deeply multifaceted, whereas other games tend to overemphasize one singular aspect of the experience. Overwatch has everything covered. Other games seem to just care about making it feel good to land headshots, which yes, Overwatch Overwatch does well. Also, the feel of the game is satisfying because the feedback and impact of every weapon and ability. There's no other game that feels as satisfying to enjoy with such a wide array of mechanics. We are really spoiled for choice in this game. From the whoosh of Kiriko's kunais to the satisfying ping of a headshot indicator and the sound effect, to the brutal crushing blows of Reinhardt's hammer. Melees, boops, ults, explosions, they're all great. And I think as you play any game, you start to take it for granted, but after years and years of playing, the poetry in motion that is Overwatch gameplay still has me addicted to this day. I'd go as far to say that Overwatch has the most satisfying game feel in the history of shooter games, and that would probably be enough to close this video, but I'm not even close to done. In this next section, I want to talk about the universe of Overwatch, which is simply the best of any competitive game out there. There's other competitive games with lore, yeah, but it's usually a tangled, uninteresting mess. Overwatch makes you connect with the characters for how they represent themselves, what they stand for, and how they impact those around them and the story at large. While the story has been underutilized thus far, the more you get into it, the more it will reward you with a deeper appreciation of the characters and the factions in the universe. Let me make an example out of one of the most evil characters in the game, Widowmaker, which I can use to explain how all the characters are interconnected. Widow is the purple-looking femme fatale who assassinated Mundata in the Alive cinematic. For reference, Mundata is the Omnic stand-in for Martin Luther King. He promoted peace between Omnics and humans, and the bad guys can't be having that, as the different evil factions either want the war explicitly or to benefit from the chaos of it. For context, Mundata's philosophy was criticized by Ramatra, who is the Magneto archetype who leads Null Sector, the faction of killer robots that are coming for us all in Season 6 Invasion to seek empowerment for Omnics through violence, the only language you'll understand. Check this Ramatra quote. He says, Mundata places the burden of peace on the oppressed and not their oppressors. I love this quote because it's true, but it doesn't prove anything in itself. Your interpretation of that line will depend on your worldview. Do you believe in retribution, an eye for an eye, or pacifism and sacrifice, turn the other cheek? Different characters believe in different means to navigate the established conflicts in the universe. But okay, we weren't here to talk about Mundata or Ramatra. I want to talk about Widowmaker, the horrible evil doer that killed the biggest peace advocate in the story. So that means we should all hate her, right? Well, not exactly. It's a bit more complicated than that. Because you see, Widowmaker wasn't always Widowmaker. She originally was a privileged French gal named Amale, who was married to Gerard Lacroix, a prominent agent of Overwatch who was doing counter-terrorism missions against the terrorist organization Talon. Talon hosts most of the human baddies in the game, home to Reaper, the brainwashed Sigma, and is led by Doomfist, who believes in empowerment at any cost. Talon, after multiple failed attempts to assassinate Gerard to no avail, decided to go full Green Goblin from Spider-Man 2002 and attack him at his heart.
First, we attack his heart.
Talon kidnapped his wife, brainwashed her, turned her into a sleeper agent for Talon, and when activated, she turned into Widowmaker and assassinated her husband in his sleep. Widow had long since been brainwashed by the time she assassinated Mundata, which makes the morality of the incident itself a bit hard to track. Widowmaker is basically the Mountain from Game of Thrones, who is more of a weapon of war rather than the brains who set the violence in motion. This example is how the factions of the game truly interact, and while it doesn't necessarily have strict gameplay implications, seeing as you can pick a lineup from any side at any time, you get bursts of this rich lore and surprise doses of voice line interactions between the characters when playing. Tracer is still angry at Widowmaker for what she did here on King's Row.
How dare you come back here?
But it's not all high-minded, of course. The interconnectivity of the characters comes through in other ways, maybe even more prevalent with the banter and camaraderie between the characters pre-game. This voice line between Mei and Orisa is adorable, and I just heard it for the first time the other day, and I've been playing Overwatch 2 for nearly a year.
Have you gotten bigger, Orisa?
My dimensions have not changed. Does the javelin make me look taller?
A little, but I still think you're just as cute as before.
Oh, that is... Thank you.
That one is cute because it lets the lore sync up with Orisa's rework, but also gives the opportunity for two female characters to support one another, and with how toxic the world can feel towards the beauty standards for young women in the Instagram generation, I thought that was a particularly nice moment. And while that subject maybe doesn't affect me personally, the Overwatch devs have flat out come out and said that it's got more voice line interactions than any other game, as far as they know. Lots of characters, lots of chances for your favorite or one that you identify with to make their mark in the game. Now, while I love the story, we have to admit that it's been underutilized until the beginning of Season 6 coming up soon. So I'm excited for them to finally get one of the strongest elements of the IP working for them. Next section, I want to handle some of the common rebuttals about the Overwatch experience, poor matchmaking, and toxicity. While I'll admit Overwatch struggles with toxicity like any other game, my friend SVB suffered one of the most egregious examples that simply was ignored by the touted defense matrix system. There's clearly always more room to improve. But for me, since I played for years in Counter-Strike and Call of Duty even before that, I can safely say that their problems are 10 to 100 times worse than ours. While maybe that doesn't make you feel better, any amount of a terminal disease is still bad, noted. The thing that I think sets Overwatch apart from a community point of view is how much more likely an Overwatch player is to be anti-toxicity and pro-inclusivity. It's at least something I've noticed from going from game to game. Thanks to this game, I've met people in this community from wide backgrounds and identities that I'd never have encountered otherwise. So it's been a benefit to my eyes, although I of course have to admit online interactions can always be improved. Now let's talk about matchmaking. Overwatch has a bit of a problem in that because the gameplay is so diverse, some playstyles, heroes, or team comps can soft or hard counter one another. The game can feel punishing, and most often players blame the matchmaking, but I think it's just the base design of the game, and maybe the matchmaking a bit too. I think it's more frustrating in ranked as well, where it very often is the case that your hero pool just doesn't suit the situation, even on your best picks. So some games in ranked can be quite rough, particularly because the matchmaker is trying to make a fair lobby that has a 50% chance to win on either side. If one or several of the players can't deal with the matchup that's being forced onto them by the random map selection and the random enemies you get, a stomp can happen really quick, and it makes it even harder to carry any given player or players. But if you're encountering this too much, I have the anecdote. I think it's this exact reason that makes me love quick play so much, because the matchmaker also aims to make a fair match, but it has a wider range of skill, and funnily enough, sometimes a more uneven matchmaking experience makes the game more fun. You might not need as much of a solid team comp to succeed, as there's probably gaps in the enemy team based on the matchmaking for you to exploit your strengths, which is less so the case in a more fairly matched ranked game. And more importantly, there's nothing on the line, so if you really want to force a weaker hero just because you like playing them, the challenge of executing their kit without anything on the line if you lose, I think that's the best way to enjoy Overwatch, especially if you're not feeling the ranked grind on any given day. Overwatch just plays better as a casual game for this reason, because the games that are a mismatch based on team composition or skill set differences are easily ignored for the glorious moments that you have when you do sync up properly and make the explosions happen or have a big pop off yourself, even if you don't end up winning. When ranked points aren't on the line, the goal can be the fun, instead of turning Overwatch into a bit of a second job, which would be kind of my recommendation if you do want to dedicate to ranked. But if you are interested in actually improving, I suggest you do a VOD review of your losses by having a coach or higher ranked player review them. The truth is, the game's skill ceiling is so high, no player has maxed it out, and while your teammates can be a detriment to winning, if you're not consistently ranking up, you are making any number of massive mistakes in your game. I promise you, whether it's the mechanics, game sense, awareness, micro or macro, there's holes in your game if you keep losing. And it's often because in the first person point of view, you can't really realize all of the things that are happening in the game, and you often have to go back to learn why you weren't aware of a certain thing happening off screen. Or, you know, maybe your aim just sucks and you probably should play an easier hero. That's at least the route I usually take. But overall, because of the first person point of view, it's easy to be lulled into thinking that your losses aren't your fault, and you definitely contribute. And the more respect you have for that, the more you can actually enjoy the ranked experience as you continue to focus on yourself, as opposed to hoping that your team teammates win the game for you. That's just not how it works, because if they belong in that rank, they're going to hold you down by design. Like, think about it. If you are destined to be at a higher rank, then you need to play better than them and better than your opponents. That's how it works. Players typically in Overwatch earn the rank that they can fall to, as opposed to earn the rank they can climb to. A lot of people usually think of that backwards, where they try to think of themselves as a player on their peak, when I think it's much more useful to think about your trough. Like when you're playing your worst, what's the lowest you can sink to, where it becomes too easy for you and you're very likely to win? What do you need to do to grind out from that point and then improve at each plateau? That's an interesting conversation I think you can have with yourself to have a better, deeper appreciation of how difficult this game is. In fact, Overwatch competitively is a shockingly deep game that, with all the complex interactions and wide array of mechanics, it's basically impossible to master them all, which brings me to the final section that I love so much about Overwatch: macro strategy. The macro strategy of Overwatch brings forth an entire layer of complexity that may only seem like it matters to the top 1% at first, but the more you learn, the more you can leverage with these concepts, no matter what your rank is, and get a deeper appreciation of the depth of the game. There's a silly number of comps you can create, but they more or less can be distilled into 3 main archetypes: poke, dive, and rush. Poke comps play like traditional shooter games, using cover and angles to pressure down the enemy or outright snipe them in one hit. They want to stay afar, on high ground, and want to get limbs before committing to the objective. Typical poke characters that like to stay afar are Sigma, Widowmaker, or Zenyatta. Dive comps are highly mobile and can lack raw firepower. Using speed and especially vertical mobility, if they navigate the map well, they can get in close on the poke characters and focus fire together to secure eliminations and use their mobility to escape when needed. Typical dive heroes are the likes of Winston, Genji, and Tracer. Brawl or rush comps are close range, a tankier comp that excels jumping on the objective. They take a while to take down and pack a punch, but lack the mobility or range of the other 2 comps. The iconic rush heroes that love to get in close are Reinhardt, Mei, and Lucio. Now, while we are constantly debating what heroes and comps are the best in any given moment, the reality is that for 90% of the player base, the patch has almost nothing to do with your performance, and instead your skill at playing in or against these archetypes does. It's this main reason that there's a lot of stomps in Overwatch, but also the main reason why I love it. Playing against Wrecking Ball and Pharah plays nothing like playing against Reinhardt and Mei. So if you or your team is inexperienced in these matchups, it can be overwhelming. But that's also kind of what makes it amazing to me. The more you learn the win conditions of each archetype's team comp interaction, the more power and agency you'll feel to take over a match. And this is a whole extra layer beyond just a hero matchup. This is now like general playstyle matchups. And you can adapt specific heroes to a different playstyle sometimes, depending on what the situation dictates. This is kind of what I started talking about at the start of the video, but in just a much more complex fashion. And the point is, knowing how the circle of counters works from an archetype point of view gives you exactly the information of where you should go in, where you should pull back, what ground to hold, and how you're going to win in any situation. We can make hundreds of videos breaking down the intricacies of this, so I'll just leave it as a general point for now, but be sure to hit subscribe and the bell icon to make sure you get notified when our upcoming videos come out if you don't want to miss out on all of the knowledge you could gain about Overwatch. So while it can be frustrating to lose because you or your team have no idea how to react when there's a Doomfist that never dies in your backline, that's also part of the beauty and charm of the game. It's wacky, it's deep, it's fun, fluid, punishing, rewarding. Overwatch has all the components of a game that you can play forever. And I'm excited that we're on this new strategy for the PvP side of the game, where it seems to be the main focus, because we're going to continuously get new maps and heroes that keep making the game fresh. And due to how much I love this franchise, you can expect that I won't be going anywhere as long as those servers are still up and running. And before we go, I wanted to shout out a few of my friends that I reached out to ask them the question why they still love Overwatch after 7 years of it being out. My good friend and duo buddy Nateson says this: I still consider it the best FPS game on the market. I love the unique playstyles of each hero and the bright, colorful, hopeful world it all lives in. As much as I wish the game had more going for it, the core gameplay loop is fantastic and an amazing experience with a lot of friends. And that means a lot to me, Nateson, considering I throw all your your games. Somehow he's still having fun. SK said this, I've been playing Overwatch for 7 years now, and I still play it because there's nothing like it. I've tried every competitive FPS game out there, and the competitive itch keeps me playing them, but Overwatch is the only one I really do enjoy. It's so fast-paced and unique, even if some parts of it frustrate me a lot and I'm not having fun half the time. The parts that I do love make up for it and make it worth it. And last but certainly not least is a comment from the Your Overwatch editor, Kale the Salad, who's been doing a great job for us for months now. He says, I think it's mostly the gameplay and heroes for me. I play other games like Apex, Rainbow Six, and Valorant 2, and they're still fun in their own right, but regardless of who I pick, the gunplay feels 99% the same in those games, even though all the characters in those games have unique kits. It's not always gun versus gun, it could be gun versus hammer versus laser cannon, and he means in Overwatch's case, of course. It goes on to say that the characters feel different and the different game modes are definitely appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it with a like. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. To support the channel, check out today's video sponsor, NVIDIA, in the description down below. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.